boy looked at him and blew two thin streams of smoke from his nose and nodded and reached for his cup. On the inside of his right forearm was a blue jaguar struggling in the coils of an anaconda. In the web of his thumb, the Pachuco cross and the 5 marks. Nothing out of the ordinary. But as he sat, he suddenly knew why this man was sitting alone. It was too late to rise again. He picked up the spoon with his left hand and began to eat. He heard the latch click shut on the door across the hall, even above the muted scrape and click of spoons on the metal trays. He looked toward the front of the hall. There was no one behind the serving line. The 2 guards were gone. He continued to eat. His heart was pounding and his mouth was dry and the food was ashes. He took the knife from his pocket and put it in the waist of his trousers. The boy stubbed out the cigarette and set the cup in the tray. Outside somewhere in the streets beyond the prison walls, a dog barked. A tamillera cried out her wares. John Grady realized he could not have heard these things unless every sound in the hall had ceased. He opened the knife quietly against his leg and slid it open longwise under the buckle of his belt. The boy stood and stepped over the bench and took up his tray and turned and started down along the far side of the table. John Grady held the spoon in his left hand and gripped the tray. The boy came opposite him. He passed. John Grady watched him with a lowered gaze. When the boy reached the end of the table, he suddenly turned and sliced the tray at his head. John Grady saw it all unfold slowly before him, the tray coming edgewise toward his eyes, the tin cup slightly tilted with the spoon in it slightly upended, standing almost motionless in the air, and the boy's greasy black hair flung across his wedge-shaped face. He flung his tray up, and the corner of the boy's tray printed a deep dent in the bottom of it. He rolled away backward over the bench and scrabbled to his feet. He thought the tray would clatter to the table, but the boy had not let go of it, and he chopped at him with it again, coming along the edge of the bench. He fell back, fending him away, and the trays clanged, and he saw the knife for the first time pass under the trays like a cold steel newt seeking out the warmth within him. He leaped away, sliding in the spilled food on the concrete floor. He pulled the knife from his belt and swung the tray backhanded and caught the cuchillero on the forehead with it. The cuchillero seemed surprised. He was trying to block John Grady's view with his tray. John Grady stepped back. He was against the wall. He stepped to his side and gripped his tray and hacked at the cuchillero's tray, trying to hit his fingers. The cuchillero moved between him and the table. He kicked back the bench behind him. The trays rattled and clanged in the otherwise silence of the hall, and the cuchillero's forehead had begun to bleed, and the blood was running down alongside his left eye. He fainted with the tray again. John Grady could smell him. He fainted, and his knife passed across the front of John Grady's shirt. John Grady dropped the tray to his midsection and moved along the wall, looking into those black eyes. The cuchillero spoke no word. His movements were precise and without rancor. John Grady knew that he was hired. He swung the tray at his head, and the cuchillero ducked and feinted and came forward. John Grady gripped the tray and moved along the wall. He ran his tongue into the corner of his mouth and tasted blood. He knew his face had been cut, but he didn't know how bad. He knew the cuchillero had been hired because he was a man of reputation, and it occurred to him he was going to die in this place. He looked deep into those dark eyes, and there were deeps there to look into, a whole malign history burning cold and remote and black. He moved along the wall, slicing back at the cuchillero with the tray. He was cut again across the outside of his upper arm. He was cut across his lower chest. He turned and slashed twice at the cuchillero with his knife. The man sucked himself up away from the blade with the boneless grace of a dervish. The men sitting at the table they were approaching had begun to rise one by one silently from the benches, like birds leaving a wire. John Grady turned again and hacked at the cuchillero with his tray, and the cuchillero squatted, and he saw him there thin and bow-legged under his outflung arm for one frozen moment, like some dark and reedy homunculus bent upon inhabiting him. The knife passed across his chest and passed back, and the figure moved with incredible speed and again stood before him, crouching slightly, faintly weaving, watching his eyes. They were watching so that they could see if death were coming. Eyes that had seen it before and knew the colors it traveled under and what it looked like when it got there. The tray clattered on the tiles. He realized he'd dropped it. He put his hand to his shirt. It came away sticky with blood, and he wiped it on the side of his trousers. The cuchillero held the tray to his eyes to blind him from his movements. He looked to be adjuring him to read something writ there, but there was nothing to see save the dents and dings occasioned by the 10,000 meals eaten off it. John Grady backed away. He sat slowly on the floor. His legs were bent crookedly under him, and he slumped against the wall with his arms at either side of him. The cuchillero lowered the tray. He set it quietly on the table. He leaned and took hold of John Grady by the hair and forced his head back to cut his throat. As he did so, John Grady brought his knife up from the floor and sank it into the cuchillero's heart. He sank it into his heart and snapped the handle sideways and broke the blade off in him. The cuchillero's knife clattered on the floor. From the red boutonniere blossoming on the left pocket of his blue work shirt, there spurted a thin fan of bright arterial blood. He dropped to his knees and pitched forward dead into the arms of his enemy. Some of the men in the hall had already stood to leave, like theater patrons, anxious to avoid the crush. John Grady dropped his knife handle and pushed at the oiled head lolling against his chest. He rolled to one side and scrabbled about until he found the cuchillero's knife. He pushed the dead man away and got hold of the table and struggled up. His clothes sagged with the weight of the blood. He backed away down the tables and turned and staggered to the door and unlatched it and walked wobbling out into the deep blue twilight. So McCarthy has the climactic moment in his Western be a knife fight. Why a knife fight in this book as opposed to, what do you usually get in a Western?
Gunfight.
Some sort of gunfight. Why a knife fight?
Well, I think in a knife fight, like a gunfight, a knife fight, you have a lot more sense of intimacy. So there's a lot more like description stuff that you can do there that makes it very vivid.
Yes. So thinking of storytellers, right? If you're going to have a long, protracted fight, and of course it's set in a prison where you can't get your hands on guns, but if you're setting the stage for an audience, you have these various objects that can be used, props, dramatic props that you can use to affect, manipulate the scene, right? So it definitely has more drama to it. Yes.
Also, like on a character level, there's more intimacy with killing someone with a knife than like a gun, especially in the way that it happens for John Grady.
Yeah, the ends in an embrace. right? And the man falls against John Grady. Intimacy is the right word to see into someone. He looks into the eyes of the assassin.
Also, I don't know if this is a stretch, but probably John Grady growing up rural Texas has some familiarity with guns.
Mm-hmm.
So putting him in a knife fight puts him at a disadvantage. And also he's kind of been looking for this cowboy adventure, and this feels like the exact opposite. But
Yeah.
what do you think about it?
Yeah, America is a gun culture. It's always been a gun culture. Mexico is an older culture. It's a blade culture, right? I mean, obviously they have guns in Mexico, but traditionally Mexico is a blade culture, an honor culture. And you guys use exactly the right word, intimacy, the intimacy of killing at contact distance and of having to like earn pressing steel, pressing metal into someone else's body, as opposed to a device putting that piece of metal out at 800 feet per second. What else do you get from a knife fight here?
I love that he keeps bringing up his eyes, especially the part where he says they were watching so that they could see if death were coming. Eyes that had seen it before and knew the colors it traveled under and what it looked like when it got there. Like there's like descriptive details of like face and like the body and stuff like that.
Yeah, as fiction writers, if you're writing a scene where there is this kind of detailed physical action, it's very, very important for you to ground your readers in space and in time. In this fight, despite all the movement, despite the props of the trays, the benches, the knives, the two fighters, you always have a sense of where John Grady and the Cuchillero are. You always can see them and see them in relation to one another. I find that sometimes with student writers, when they're writing about, there's like a set piece where there's a lot of action, there can be just a confusion on the part of the reader about where are these folks. So I think it's really important to, if you have any kind of action sequence, that you choreograph everything that's going to happen. If you have to draw a diagram, draw a diagram. If you have to have a friend come over and you kind of reenact just kind of like a staging, the way like a director would do blocking for a play. It's like, okay, this, I need this person to go here. And then that if you have two characters knife fighting, that you're aware, if I'm putting one arm out to fend or to blind my opponent, is my weapon hand back? Is my reaction hand forward? What happens when they're swapped? Where does the knife end up on this person's body? What is out of reach of the knife, et cetera, et cetera. So you just kind of understand the physics of this, and I mean the physical realities.
Also the fact that John Grady will be physically changed after this fight. He later on we learn that he has the scar on his face from the stitches and stuff, and it's a callback to what him and I think it was the aunt, right, talked about earlier.
Yeah, scars have the power to remind us the past is real, right? Exactly so.
It also it changes the way that you think about fighting almost.
Okay,
With
interesting.
With a gun, depending on what caliber the round is, what type of gun it is, it doesn't necessarily always matter what you hit as long as you hit, because a bullet's gonna break bones, it's gonna tear flesh.
Can.
A knife, it's if you cut me on the leg, it's not gonna do as much. I might limp a little bit, but if I'm stabbing you through the neck, the stomach, the face, all these things matter.
Yeah, in gunfight, shot placement matters a lot. It matters what caliber of round. Are you striking your opponent in the hips, shattering his pelvis? Are you hitting the vitals, right? You hitting in this area? It's not good to be shot anywhere with any caliber. right? But there are certain things you don't want to be shot with, and certain places you don't want to be shot. You don't want to be shot in either thigh, where it's going to hit the femoral artery. You don't want to be shot, right, on and on and on and on. You don't want to be gut shot. You don't want to be shot anywhere in the upper thorax. You don't want to be shot anywhere. But as you're saying, a knife, however, doesn't jam, doesn't need to be reloaded. It severs muscle, tendon, and bone sometimes with a single thrust or a single slice, right? So it's, a brutal kind of business. There's also potentially, depending on what the distance is, if you have two men in a gunfight of some kind, the victor, quote victor, the one who walks away, might walk away like, looking physically clean, right? In a knife fight, it's butchery, right? You're just going to be, you're going to be so, and it's back to the intimacy. You're going to be soaked with the other guy's blood. You're going to be soaked with your own blood. When I was younger and dumber, it's hard to imagine both of those things, actually. I was doing Filipino martial arts, and we would do like knife fighting classes. We weren't fighting each other with live blades. We're using training blades that are like aluminum. They're dull. And I remember the instructor saying, like, what are you thinking about in a knife fight? You go into a guy with a knife and you've got a knife. And I said, well, you don't want to get cut. And he goes, no, it's a knife fight. You're going to get cut. It's like, where are you getting cut? You take cuts potentially. Don't go do this. Potentially take cuts on the backs of your arms. You don't want to take cuts on the insides of your arms. So on and so forth. The way he broke it down is the winner of the knife fight is the second person to fall over dead. Or if you've got two guys fighting with knives and they're both really bad, they're both going to the morgue. If you've got two guys with knives and they're both really good, they're both going to the morgue. If you've got two guys with knives and one's really bad and one's really good, one's going to the morgue and the other one's going to the hospital. Like you're not going to avoid getting cut in any way. I know there are all these films where someone whips out a knife and you can disarm people with knives, but generally you get stuck a few times.
Yeah, I used to do kendo, which is this Japanese swordsmanship. And the big thing is, like, its target areas change everything with a knife fight. Like, there's a reason that when we do kendo, there's not nearly as much padding on your arm as there is on your hand, your wrist,
Right.
your head,
Sure.
even your stomach area. Like, and even the differences in those types of padding. I mean, it's just a really thick cloth covering your hand, but you've got a cage on your head.
Yeah. Something that you don't see, I haven't seen in stories, but it's a real thing about knife wounds. Often, when people are stabbed, like with a knife, and it goes to the hilt inside your body or inside one of your limbs, the body creates a kind of suction around the blade. And they're mostly slicing in this fight, but they're doing that because when you stab, you're going to potentially lose that blade in someone. It's very difficult to get out, or can be. And your body kind of holds on to it, creates suction around it. Also, if you're ever stabbed, you don't remove the object. Let them do it at the hospital. That's enough knife talk. Thank you for joining me on Knife Talk today. Let's go back to the captain. Last time, page 162, last time Blevins said he wanted to be a bad man. And we get there's a brief section in the second part of the novel where John Grady's talking to Rollins. John Grady turns and leaves, and we're left with Rollins just for a second. But now we have an entire scene. I get excited, and I think storytellers should get excited whenever you realize you get to create a villain. And villains are fun in stories, right? There's a thrill and an energy. Is this villain going to be the kind of philosopher, intellectual, Hannibal Lecter kind of villain? Basically born out of Milton's Satan, where you have this, in Shakespeare's Shakespeare's Iago, Melville's Ahab, where you have like a hyper smart villain. Is the villain going to be pure dumb evil? What's this person going to look like, and what's going to be the nature of evil in your world? Even though McCarthy has other villains who are more lethal, the captain is so well drawn and so believable that he's particularly terrifying to me. Also, he comes to us under the color of law. On 162, the captain was sitting at his desk drinking coffee and reading a 3-day-old newspaper from Monterey. He looked up. He asked for Rollins' passport. "I don't have no passport," said Rollins. The captain looked at him. He raised his eyebrows in mock surprise. "Don't have no passport," he said. "You have identification?" Rollins reached around to his left rear pocket with his manacled hands. He could reach the pocket, but he couldn't reach into it. The captain nodded, and one of the guards stepped forward and took out the billfold and handed it across to the captain. The captain leaned back in the chair. The guard swung his keys forward and took hold of Rollins' wrists and unlocked the handcuffs and stepped back and put them in his belt. Rollins stood rubbing his wrists. The captain turned the sweat-blackened leather in his hand. He looked at both sides of it, and he looked up at Rollins. Then he opened it and took out the cards, and he took out the photograph of Betty Ward, and he took out the American money and then the Mexican peso bills, which alone were unmutilated. He spread these things out on the desk and leaned back in the chair and folded his hands together and tapped his chin with his forefingers and looked at Rollins again. Outside, Rollins could hear a goat. He could hear children. The captain made a little rotary motion with one finger. "Turn around," he said. He did so. "Put down your pants." "Do what?" "Put down your pants." "What the hell for?" The captain must have made another gesture because the guard stepped forward and took a leather sap from his rear pocket and struck Rollins across the back of the head with it. The room Rollins was in lit up all white, and his knees buckled, and he reached about in the air. He was lying with his face against the splintery wooden floor. He didn't remember falling. The floor smelled of dust and grain. He pushed himself up. They waited. They seemed to have nothing else to do. He got to his feet and faced the captain. He felt sick to his stomach. "You still want to be a bad man, Rollins?" "You must cooperate," said the captain. "Then you don't have no troubles. Turn around, put down your pants." He turned around and unbuckled his belt and pushed his trousers down around his knees, and then the cheap cotton undershorts he'd bought in the commissary at La Vega. "Lift your shirt," said the captain. He lifted his shirt. "Turn around," said the captain. He turned. "Get dressed." He let the shirt fall and reached and hauled up his trousers and buttoned them and buckled back the belt. The captain was sitting holding the driver's license from his billfold. "What is your date of birth?" he said. "September 26, 1932. "What is your address?" "Route 4, Knickerbocker, Texas, United States of America." "How much is your height?" 5'11". "How much is your weight?" 160 pounds. The captain tapped the license in the desk. He looked at Rollins. "You have a good memory. Where is this man?" "What man?" He held up the license. This man, Rollins. Rollins swallowed. He looked at the guard and he looked at the captain again. I'm Rollins, he said. The captain smiled sadly. He shook his head. Rollins stood with his hands dangling. Why ain't I, he said. Why you come here, said the captain. Come where? Here, to this country. We come down here to work. Speak English, please. You come to buy cattle? No, sir. No. You have no permit, correct? We just come down here to work. At La Purissima. Anywhere, that's just where we found work. How much they pay you? We was getting 200 pesos a month. In Texas, what do they pay for this work? I don't know, 100 a month? $100. Yes, sir. 800 pesos. Yes, sir, I reckon. The captain smiled again. Why you must leave Texas? We just left. We didn't have to. What is your true name? Lacey Rollins. He pushed the forearm of his sleeve against his forehead and at once wished he hadn't. Blevins is your brother. No, we got nothing to do with him. What is the number of horses you steal? We never stole no horses. These horses have no marca. They come from the United States. You have a factura for these horses? No, we rode down here from San Angelo, Texas. We don't have no papers on them. They're just our horses. Where do you cross the border? Just out of Langtree, Texas. What is the number of men you kill? I never killed nobody. I never stole nothing in my life. That's the truth. Why you have guns for? To shoot game. Game? Game. To hunt. Cazador. Now, you're hunters. Where is Rollins? Rollins was close to tears. You're looking at him, damn it. What is the true name of the assassin Blevins? I don't know. How long since you know him? I don't know him. I don't know nothing about him. The captain pushed back the chair and stood. He pulled down the hem of his coat to correct the wrinkles, and he looked at Rollins. You are very foolish, he said. Why do you want to have these troubles? What makes the captain so menacing?
That he has literally all of the power, and he thinks that he already knows exactly what's happened. And Rollins can do absolutely nothing about it.
Yeah, he's in the control of this man. Later, the captain says this thing to John Grady about we can make the truth here, or we can, not do so. But once you go to Saltillo, your lives are in the hands of other parties. And John Grady doesn't like this, right? He's like, this idea of making truth. And, the truth is what happened. It's not what come out of somebody's mouth, John Grady says. What else makes the captain so menacing? Definitely what you said. Are there other things that contribute to his menace?
Just kind of like the coolness of him. He never gets emotional. He's not like arrogant or stuck up. He's just very like flat. Like in my head, he has a very flat voice with no tone or emotion.
Yeah, and even though he is wrong about what he says, factually wrong about what he says to Rollins, everything he says makes sense, right? It doesn't really track if you're like investigating it from his perspective that you would leave your own country to make, an eighth of the money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
His lack of explanation.
Tell me about that. Yeah, there's no explanation.
Yeah, everything he says is just telling him he's incorrect and not explaining why, how. Even especially at the beginning, asking him to turn around and bend over, and that strip search for no reason is there's a lot that goes into that. It's like a mind game.
Yeah, the moment when Rollins is a good kid from San Angelo, Texas. He has never been in any kind of trouble. So the moment like he's hit across the back of the head with a sap and he's knocked out and he's on the floor, it's like his entire world shifts. He's like, oh, this is possible. Yes.
I think it's because he's like them.
Hmm.
When he talks about that story where he's talking about the women, how no one laughs at him, he's like Blevins. He doesn't like for people to laugh at him or make fun of him.
Interesting. I never put those two things together, but I think you're right. Blevins said earlier when they're at the house, I don't like people laughing at me. And I was just about to read the passage you're referring to. This is on a captain again, page 181. I will tell you a story, he said. By the way, anytime like a villain starts off, like that's their opening gambit, I will tell you a story, you're like, I'm not going to be entertained by this, and I'm going to leave feeling worse than I feel now. Because I like you. I was young man like you see. And this time I tell you, I was always with these older boys because I want to learn everything. So on this night, in the fiesta of San Pedro in the town of Linares in Nuevo Leon, I was with these boys, and they have some mezcal and everything. You know what is mezcal? And there was this woman, and all of these boys is go out to this woman, and they is have this woman, and I am the last one. And I go out to the place where is this woman, and she has refused me because she say I am too young or something like that. What does a man do, you see? I can no go back because they will all see I don't go with this woman because the truth is always plain, you see. A man cannot go out to do something and then he go back. Why he go back? Because he changed his mind. A man does not change his mind. The captain made a fist and held it up. Maybe they tell her to refuse me so they can laugh. They give her some money or something like that. But I don't let whores make trouble for me. When I come back, there is no laughing. No one is laughing, you see. That has always been my way in this world. I am the one when I go someplace, then there is no laughing. When I go there, then they stop laughing. Do you think a lack of humor, a lack of a sense of humor, I don't want to say as a red flag. I know you guys like to say things are red flags. Do you think that's a marker of evil or malevolence?
I don't think so. I mean, I can think of a lot of evil, like, villains in media that are very humorous to me. It's not necessarily that they're actively trying to be funny,
Mm-hmm.
but it's just like the level of intensity and like the deadpan sense that I get from a lot of them that gives them that humor. But there's something that's just it's a different level of sinister from someone who's like a no nonsense, like you can tell there's not anything that lights up this person's day.
There's not anything that lights up his day.
I think it's less about like being funny and more about like not being able to laugh at yourself. Like I think people who aren't able to like poke fun at themselves, obviously not in like a self-destructive way, but in just like a funny way. Like I think that to me symbolizes like pride and arrogance.
Yeah, and just a refusal to be vulnerable in any way, or just to be like, oh, things aren't that serious. And if you have someone who takes everything this seriously, oh boy. And yet he does seem to like them. It's kind of a crazy kind of thing. That makes him even more ominous to me. And he doesn't seem, whereas Judge Holden from Blood Meridian or Anton Chigurh from No Country for Old Men, those are these, larger than life, outsized villains. And that's part of their appeal as characters in those novels, why they work as villains in those books. This is like a recognizable person from our world transposed to this world. And so the credibility with which he's rendered causes me to... Judge Holden I don't recoil from, because Judge Holden is a character, to me, is always a character in a book. Same with Anton Chigurh. They're great characters, perfect for those worlds, and fascinating. I don't expect a Judge Holden to walk into my life. Maybe one day. But this guy could walk into our lives. You could be at the mercy of someone like this. And I mean, what are you going to do? Argue with him? Try to convince him out of his notions? Like he's fully who he is, right? He's baked into this way of life. That's who he is in the world. Page 189, when Rollins is cut, you have this great simile where Rollins throws out his hands, trying to avoid the knife, and the narrator says, like a man refereeing his own bloodletting, which is particularly good. One of my favorite characters, I like, because the novel would function perfectly well without the Papazote Perez, but it's just this walk-on part, and it's brilliant. You can completely imagine this man. He seems to have this entire history, entire life. He's incredibly vivid, and he's providing this philosophical dimension. Page 193. He took cigarettes from his shirt pocket and offered them across the table. John Grady didn't move. Please, said Perez. It is all right. It is not the same as breaking bread. It places one under no obligation. He leaned forward and took a cigarette and put it in his mouth. Perez took a lighter from his pocket and snapped it open and lit it and held it across the table. Where did you learn to fight? He said. John Grady took a deep pull on the cigarette and leaned back. What do you want to know? He said. Only what the world wants to know. What does the world want to know? The world wants to know if you have cojones, if you are brave. He lit his own cigarette and laid the lighter on top of the pack of cigarettes on the table and blew a thin stream of smoke. Then it can decide your price, he said. Some people don't have a price. That is true. What about those people? Those people die. I ain't afraid to die. That is good. It will help you to die. It will not help you to live. Is the Papazote correct about these things? Start with premise one. The world only wants to know one thing: if you have cojones, if you're brave. Do you guys think that's correct about the world?
I don't know if it's correct about the world at large, but I know the world that he's accustomed to, the world inside of this prison, that seems correct, yeah.
Others of you, do you think it's correct that the only thing the world wants to know is if you're brave?
Obviously, this has to do with perspective, but I think that in the world of success, yes.
Tell me about that.
If you want to be the best in a lot of these perspectives, business and whatever, you have to either push, not do some negative things on other people, but beat other people at what they're doing, or put in a lot of hard work, or spend a lot of nights doing things you don't want to do. Like doing the difficult things to get to where you want to be and being better than others.
Yeah, what you guys are doing, what all you're doing, in school, taking classes, jumping through hoops, working towards something, constantly submitting yourself for approval. It's not physical courage, but you're managing this anxiety. Because we all, if you're a student, at any moment it can fall apart, right? If you just stop doing the work or get something wrong, you know that. I always had them in math classes, but that sense of like, walking a tightrope in a class, and you're like, boy, this could just all go off the rails for me, right? So I think you all know this kind of quality. It might not be physical courage in this particular instance, but you all know this quality of dealing with fear. And you've also seen people fold under it. And you see what happens to people who are like, I can't do this anymore, I can't do it. I can't take the pressure of it, whatever that happens to be. And it seems like what Perez is talking about in this passage is a more intense version of that to me. So let's say for a moment that Perez is correct. The world only wants to know one thing: if you're brave. Then it can name its price. What does Perez mean? That once the world knows you're brave, the world names its price. Yes?
It's because like bravery is a spectrum almost, is how I interpret that. The way to how brave you are or what outwardly you're willing to do. For example, like for success in whatever facet. Now it's like everybody else knows how hard they can push you. It's like what can you take and what can't you take? Like,
What your capabilities are.
yeah, is there a is there like an end limit? Like are you someone who like there's nothing that like no one can fuck with you, or are you someone that's just gonna back down instantly?
Yeah, I love
Push back?
really good gangster stories for this reason, because generally a well-told a gangster film or a gangster series, like there's the young man who enters this world, and the boss sees that he's willing to go to this place that other people aren't. The boss recognizes something in him. It's like, oh, he has what the papazote is.
So, cojones in Spanish, it's like slang for balls. So it's like the whole thing, like in Mexico, kind of, they place a lot of emphasis on a man's masculinity and his worth on that. And even in this little prison that they're in, there's like a thing that they have going on over like, I don't think like class is the right word, but just like who's like the braver person there.
Mm-hmm.
So just like culturally speaking, they place more like price, like they're worth more if they have more cojones.
Yeah,
But
and
they didn't.
absolutely. And the narrator has told us when they get to the prison that everyone in the Saltillo prison is sorted into this hierarchy. And the one factor that governs the economy is their willingness to kill, right? So it's definitely what the papazote says is true in that sense. John Grady says, of course he's speaking about himself, some men don't have a price. And Perez is like, yep, that's true. And what happens to those? They die. Those people die. And John Grady, like, kind of misreads this. He's like, oh, I ain't afraid to die. And I think the papazote is telling him something that he really ought to take to heart. He's like, good. Like, it'll help you die. It's not going to help you live. And what John Grady really needs is something to help him live. That would be, he's got all these tools and he's very capable, but he's missing this one tool set. I believe that tool set is what thing is going to help me live. And then we get into this very interesting conversation about evil and the way Americans see evil and the way people in Mexico see evil. Perez says, I hope you will give some thought to your situation. Americans have ideas sometimes that are not so practical. They think there are good things and bad things. They're very superstitious, You don't think there's good things and bad things? Things? No. I think it is a superstition. It is the superstition of a godless people. You think Americans are godless? Oh, yes, don't you? No. I see them attack their own property. I saw a man one time destroy his car. with a big martillo. What do you call it? Hammer. Because it would not start. Would a Mexican do that? I don't know. A Mexican would not do that. The Mexican does not believe that a car can be good or evil. If there is evil in the car, he knows that to destroy the car is to accomplish nothing, because he knows where good and evil have their home. The Anglo thinks in his rare way that the Mexican is superstitious. But who is the one? We know there are qualities to a thing. This car is green, or it has a certain motor inside. But it cannot be tainted, you see, or a man, even a man. There can be in a man some evil, but we don't think it is his own evil. Where did he get it? How did he come to claim it? No. Evil is a true thing in Mexico. It goes about on its own legs. Maybe someday it will come to visit you. Maybe it already has. What do you think about this idea of, I think what Perez says about American culture and about American ideas of good and evil, I believe we often think of people as being, oh, that's a bad guy, or that person's evil, that's wicked. And we'll even talk about that's blood money, that's dirty money, as if like the money itself can have some kind of quality. And Perez is saying that is foreign to his way of thinking and to the Mexican culture's way of thinking about. Evil is its own entity that goes about, and it can reach out and put its tendrils in you. You can have some evil in you, but it goes about on its own. It's a presence, right? It's another way of kind of describing a devil or the devil, right? That there's evil outside and it can touch various things, but the evil is still in this figure. What do you guys make of that? Do you guys agree, or do you think it's strange, or maybe it's just more of a foreign concept? Yeah.
I mean, the concept of evil, at least, or I guess it kind of, it correlates to generally what we believe in, like when he mentions that the Americans is like a godless people. I feel like that reflects on, I guess, the state of like the whole, like, and when John's like, wait, but we have God, like we're not godless. It's just like it doesn't matter about what, like you have a God.
But collectively.
Collectively it's like, doesn't matter about the individual so much. It's like there is an evil that obviously manifests in something, but
Right.
being a different culture is, you have no idea what the barrier is here.
Yeah, I think Perez is also speaking to something about rationality, and it's a version of what Alejandra's father, beware, gentle knight, there's no greater monster than reason. And that to the Anglo has kind of sorted things into that's reasonable, that's rational, that's irrational. And Perez, I think, sees that as superstition. It's true, you've seen people like hit their cars because they won't start, right? Like this bad thing. It's pretty interesting. Other thoughts about that? Yeah.
I think it's a conversation of like circumstance and how, I think what he's trying to argue here is that people aren't really born evil. It's something that's brought up within their society, within their home. And I think that the difference between like John Brady's perspective or like an American perspective is that they're so quick to blame and kind of put this westernized view on something else that they don't really know that much about. And it's like, oh, it's just their culture, quote. Like you hear that a lot when people are stereotyping another culture, another country. I think Americans are just very quick to assume that people are just, quote, like that. I think he's arguing here that it's not true, right?
When you refer to the westernized, I forget, what did you say about
It's like the westernized like ideals.
Yeah,
forcing
like,
those on.
yeah, can we drill down on that? Like, what are those Western ideals that create this dynamic you're talking about?
I think like a lot of it has to do with how Americans kind of like assume, like for example, like how perhaps when Americans go into a different country and they assume that our way of life or like our values in government will work for this country because it worked for us, but that country has a completely different history and a completely different background, and I think that might be an example of like Western ideals kind of being forced in a place where it like doesn't really belong.
Yeah, one of the things that Americans often assume to their detriment is that we prize freedom, and freedom of a particular kind, and democracy of a particular kind, and that we go to countries that we believe don't have these things and invade them, and then we're going to like give them democracy, we're going to bring them freedom. My question has always been, okay, why would they want that? Like, we value being free. Like, we value our version of freedom. We value our version of Republican democracy. Why would other people want that? Why would that be meaningful to them? And sometimes it isn't. They don't want that. It's not their tradition. It's not what they've grown to value. They have other things they value that we don't.
I think he's also like drawing a line between how Americans think about themselves and the things that happen to them versus maybe how other parts of the world do. Like, I think Americans can be very self-obsessed because we are so individualistic, and so everything that happens to us is like very personalized and it's very targeted. So like, if my car doesn't start in the morning, right, that's like an evil thing that has specifically targeted me. Whereas he says that like good and evil have their home, like they have their place in society. They are both in society and they move around, you know, as events happen in our life, and it's got nothing to do with us.
Yeah, it's well said. There are ideas that grow out of the Puritans and keep reverberating. And one of the core ideas of the Puritans is that godly favor and righteousness is manifested in physical circumstances. So if you are prosperous, if you're wealthy, if your business is going good, that is, evidence in some way of God's favor. And likewise, if you're sick or impoverished, et cetera, that's evidence of wickedness, that you don't have God's favor. And that view sounds, obviously when you say it out loud, it sounds very antiquated and from, centuries ago. But like, that thinking still is very prevalent, right? It's very prevalent. If you see, people see homeless people on the street, and Americans, many, will automatically be like, oh, they must have done something. Maybe not. You literally don't know what's happened in each situation. But that's again that thinking of like, oh, you do good things and good things come to you. You do bad things come to you. Except we all know people who do bad things and they're showered with riches. And we know people who do good things and they die in poverty alone, right? So sometimes there's not the same kind of cause and effect relationship.
I think it's kind of oxymoronic, because we were just talking about how he's seen as such a serious person, but he's essentially being like, as Mexicans, we don't take stuff like that seriously, versus how the Americans view it, like how we internalize the car as our personal issue. He's like, we would never do that. It's like the antithesis of what he was saying earlier, what he stands for.
Interesting.
We also talk about this American dream that I feel like everyone in the world seems to know something about what the American dream is. but there's no sense of like, oh, what's like the Mexican dream? What's the Argentinian dream? Like the German
Right.
dream, the Japanese dream? Like that, you don't really hear stuff like that. Because it's almost like they're prideful of their nation versus America. It's like, I don't care what the nation's like as long as I'm myself.
That's the American dream. The American dream is that every individual is like a little America, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, building an empire, right? And it is true, the French, for example, and of course not all French, the French, for example, do have a sense of, they prize liberty, but they also believe they belong to a culture. They belong to this particular place. So in America, if you're Muslim, you can wear a burqa, right? If you're a Muslim woman, you believe that, you wear the hijab, the burqa. Not in France, right? They believe in religious liberty, but they're like, you're in France, act French, right? Which strikes us as like, well, that's not freedom of speech, freedom of religion. The French have a different concept of that, right? So there's, the French dream is, if there's a French dream, it's a sense of liberty, but also like belonging to, you're beholden to this thing. Americans, you can't tell any of us what to do. You ever tried to tell an American what to do? They hate it. I don't want to be told what to do. They'll start talking about George Washington almost immediately. It's like, oh, you need to, like, oh, you have to, like, you know, get your car inspected. George Washington did not cross the Delaware, right? There's that kind of sense. So, like, we all have it inside us. It's deep. Interesting, in like the 19th century West, after the Civil War, as Americans move westward, many of them like go to these territories, Wyoming, Dakota, Montana, Oregon, etc. They go to these territories because they want to get away from the strictures of American law, the American system. What they didn't seem to understand is that they carried America inside them. So they would go to Deadwood, South Dakota, because there was no law and gold you could scoop from the streams with your bare hands. But then they realized, oh, we're going to need like houses, and then we're going to need like a sheriff to provide some sort of policing. Oh, and then we're going to need like a bank to keep the money in. We're going to have a mayor. If we have a mayor, we have to have a city council. If we have a city council, we have to have a comptroller. Right, so they end up rebuilding the thing they leave, and they can only rebuild what they know. And what they know is America, and America's inside you. Last passage on page 203. Just like a Freytag triangle, this is a coming-of-age story, and McCarthy has John Grady come of age in a single paragraph on 203. He looked at the floating rod of light. It was light from under a door. He listened. He held his breath and listened because the room was small. It seemed to be small, and if the room was small, he could hear them breathing in the dark if they were breathing, but he heard nothing. He half wondered if he were not dead, and in his despair, he felt well up in him a surge of sorrow like a child beginning to cry. But it brought with it such pain that he stopped it cold and began at once his new life and the living of it breath to breath. Right? So the John Grady of before the knife fight is a John Grady who still believes someone is coming to take care of you. Right? Someone is coming to protect you. Someone is coming to deal with the things you're going to face. And then in this moment, nobody's coming. It's up to me. right? And this is where I have to be, and this is what the world is. No mother's coming to comfort me, no father's coming to bail me out. This is what my life is now. And there he is, John Grady Cole. He's changed.